What if I told you that one clerical mistake nearly derailed my entire medical career? I was rejected from the foundation program, not because I wasn't eligible, but because of a mistake that I made on a form. I was devastated, but that mistake led me on a path that I never expected. Today, I'm an academic GP working in the United Kingdom, and in this video, I'd like to share my journey from international medical graduate to clinician, teacher, and researcher, and everything I'd wish I had known at the start. Let's get started. Hello, if you're new to the channel, my name is Dr. Cara Bedzina. I'm a GP working in Glasgow, and this is my story about how I went from IMG to academic GP. Let's start from the beginning. I graduated in 2014 from the University of Malta. I'm from Malta. My dad's Maltese and my mum's Canadian. And I had always known that after medical school, I wanted to do my residency or postgrad training in another country. And my heart had been set on the United Kingdom. But that year, as I was finishing up my degree, I ended up getting an email from the foundation program saying that my application had been rejected, and they cited the reason for rejection. And once I realized the mistake I had made, I contacted the foundation program office. But unfortunately, it was a position of computer says no. I remember leaving a message on a phone number I had tracked down. I had asked for the case to be appealed, and it was rejected again, all because I had made a mistake on a form. Now, at the time, this was devastating because I had made plans and also dreamt of moving to the United Kingdom. Now, there was the possibility for me to do my foundation training at home in Malta, but I knew that if I started there, I would actually find it quite hard to leave. So what ended up happening was I ended up taking a year out, a year that wasn't my choice, and it led me to some interesting opportunities. During that time, I started to entertain the idea of moving to the United States and doing residency there. I did a research fellowship in Minnesota, and this was mainly in quantitative research. And what I realized from spending time there, I'd also spent some time in Chicago, was actually the lifestyle in the US wasn't for me. So even though at the time I had been studying for my USMLEs, I ultimately decided not to do them. And instead, I reapplied for the foundation program. Nothing had changed, except I knew how to do the form this time and watch out for that error. But oh my God, I can remember feeling absolutely terrified that I had made a mistake again. I sat for my SJT and was offered a place. So I had a year out. And when I look back, I really wish I could go back to Cara back then and just show her a lot of compassion, because at the time I wasn't very compassionate. I internalized a lot of shame, feeling of rejection, feeling I wasn't good enough. Whereas now, when I look back, I go, you know, mistakes happen. It's not your fault that it was a paper form and the error that you made was enough that they just decided they weren't going to accept any amendments. And it's quite funny because now I work in academic circles for people who are quite high up in medical education, and they're always shocked when I tell them about my story. But I think the biggest message around that was I felt quite helpless and hopeless because there was no one I could speak to, no one I could get guidance from. And all I had was this streamlined appeal process where they just decided to reject it anyway because of an honest mistake I had made. So I guess when I look back in this chapter of my life, it really makes me think of the fact that setbacks aren't usually dead ends, they're just detours. If I hadn't taken that year out, hadn't gone to the US, hadn't tried it out in the US, I might have, you know, considered it later down the line. And also with the chain of events that happened later in my life, I might have never met my husband, who's also a doctor, because I made certain decisions at that point in my life that led me to certain areas of the United Kingdom. So actually, I look back and I'm grateful for the time I spent out. It was really, really hard at the time, but I pushed forward and decided to follow through. And the thing was, at the time, I didn't talk to anyone about it. I really only told my parents, and that was because of the way shame and other difficult topics were discussed within the community. There wasn't a lot of tolerance or compassion for things like that. But now I actually am very open about it and share my story to whoever I can, to tell them, listen, like, I had a really tough time, but I was very persistent and I didn't let that stop me from following my dreams. Lots of reasons why I wanted to practice in the United Kingdom, but I knew actually for quite a while that I wanted to do my training in Scotland, and that was because I had friends who were ahead of me in medical school who had gone to Scotland and had really good things to say about it. Now, all of my friends were actually in the Central Belt, Glasgow, Edinburgh, etc. And I knew these areas were quite competitive, but I also knew that if I moved to Glasgow and Edinburgh, it was likely that I would just end up hanging out with them, and I wanted an adventure. I really wanted to go to a place where I could create my own story, be someone different from the girl on the island and the person I had been. It's really interesting growing up on an island like Malta. Most people that you know, you've known them since you were a little kid, and you've known them through primary school and then secondary school and then university. So I was really keen to go somewhere new. And what attracted to me to the north of Scotland was the remote and rural element. And so what I ended up choosing was, I chose Aberdeen, picked to do my FY2 in Inverness. So a lot of the rural programs have you going away on an island for 4 months, or somewhere like Fort William for 4 months. And some FYs end up for a year. But I knew, because at the time I didn't have my license and I wasn't going to be driving, I just wanted to be in one place. So I did FY1 in Aberdeen and FY2 in Inverness. And it was very, very interesting. So I think one of the bits of advice I would give to anyone who's moving to the United Kingdom from another country is make sure you give yourself time before your job starts to settle in. I don't know if it would be the case now, but certainly when I moved over, in order to get a bank account, you needed a home address, but in order to have a home address, you needed a bank account. So I was just stuck in this perpetual loop. God knows how I eventually got one in the end. But yeah, that was one of the things that I hadn't anticipated, and it took a while to sort it out. And it was important that I had the bank account so I could get my first paycheck. And the other thing that I hadn't really appreciated was how stressful it would actually be. At this point in my life, I had done electives in Germany and in Canada and in America, and these were so much fun, but I had never lived in another country before by myself. And that first year as an FY1 was probably one of the toughest years, because I look back and I think of times where I was really, really, really lonely. I had moved into a house with 4 other FY1s, which was great. And also, I got on really well with the other FY1s that I worked with at the hospital. The issue when you're friends with the other FY1s is when you're at work, you're usually together at work, or if you're on the same rota, you're covering for each other. So it can actually make socializing quite difficult. And I had expanded my network. So I had friends that weren't medics, but then it was really tough to organize things because I was working loads of back shifts, loads of night shifts, loads of weekends. In particular, I remember Christmas being so tough. We ended up doing something together, some of the FY1s that I knew. We had like our own little Christmas dinner, and then I went to a twilight shift. Oh my God, that was so depressing, like leaving Christmas dinner to go to work. But I remember the bit between, you know, Twixmas, between Christmas and New Year. And I was like, right, I don't want to stay in Aberdeen. I'm gonna go to Edinburgh. So I went to Edinburgh, and I just remember seeing all these families together and couples, and I just felt completely and utterly alone. I missed my family, and I hadn't developed the community that I had known for so long in Malta. So I think don't underestimate how important it is to develop that community when you move to a new country. And the thing about this is that, yes, it's something that you can do, but actually a good community, a high quality community takes time. So you've got that element where you're feeling really alone, you're a little homesick, and you're adjusting to a new culture. Plus you're undergoing one of the most stressful transitions in your medical career. That's a lot. And so I always have a lot of time and a lot of heart and a lot of like space for IMGs. I think that a lot of my UK friends were really lovely. I enjoyed their company, but at the end of the day, they didn't understand what it was like to not be able to go and see your parents at the drop of the hat for a weekend. But FY1 was also pretty great. I developed a lot of confidence in my clinical skills. I got to know the system, and I made some incredible friends. So yeah, it's a tough year. Go easy on yourself. Be intentional about where you go. And I think the moral of this chapter of my life was give yourself grace and also make time to spend it with others and develop those relationships with others. Be kind to yourself, because those good friendships, those really strong communities, they take a long time to form. What we're moving to now is from that idea of survival to stability. So after FY2, I decided to do GP training. I had done a GP placement in Inverness, and I absolutely loved it. I love the fact that we managed little babies who had just been born, doing their like 6-week check, to older people who were juggling multiple long-term conditions, to caring for people in the final stage of their life, and everything in between, talking about contraception with a teenager or discussing a new cancer diagnosis. Like, I felt like it was the first time with my different rotations where I actually was a doctor, and so I was hooked. And that's what made me decide to do GP training. The other thing I liked about it was when I looked at my colleagues who were in hospital-based settings, I just saw them really worn out and tired. And it wasn't that the GPs weren't, but it felt like the GPs were getting a lot from their work. And I think the other thing is a lot of the values about how I live my life and I think about my purpose, they aligned with a lot of the values that I found in GP. It was also one of the first places where I had the most incredible teaching and learning experiences. And so I knew it was for me. Now, GP training wasn't easy. I think when we're talking about hard years, I think about that year for FY1. I also think about the year where I did A&E for 6 months. Oh my God, that rota was awful. Awful, but I survived. But another year that really sticks out in my mind that was a massive challenge was actually ST3. So up until this point, I had done my training full time. But what I decided to do in ST3 was I dropped to 80%, and that was an incredible decision. So, and in a good way. So I was a GP trainee during the pandemic, and I went from, we didn't really have that many telephone consultations. So I think that the thing that makes it so tough in ST3 is that you are doing the job of a GP, but you're also doing all the learning. And my practice, they were really proud of the fact that they gave you a lot to do. So very early on, I was dealing with admin, I was doing triage. So there was a lot to handle at the start, but before we had reached lockdown in March, I was that GP trainee doing face-to-face consultations from first thing in the morning till last thing at night. And it was pretty exhausting, even only working 4 days a week, between preparing for my exam, the CSA, doing all the stuff for my learning log, and also developing my skills as a GP and handling the complexity and like cognitive load and stress that comes with that. It was one of the most difficult periods of my training career. And I had, the thing is that you're probably wondering, well, you're an academic GP now. Where does the academia come in? This is the thing. I always had an interest in medical education. And I knew I wanted it to be a part of my career. But I also knew from moving from Malta to the UK was that I wanted to get my clinical skills under my belt. I wanted to have that confidence clinically. And so I made a decision that I was going to pursue my clinical training and prioritize that for me, because it was what mattered to me. It also meant that once I finished my GP training, I would have the flexibility of a portfolio career. So there's a lot more understanding for trainees going less than full time, doing academic posts alongside their training. But when I was a GP trainee in the Highlands, there weren't as many opportunities there. If there were, I wasn't aware of them. And so in my mind, it made sense to just keep going. But it also got me through ST3, because I even remember telling my trainer this. I was like, I am doing a master's in medical education the moment I finish this, because I wanted to do something that I actually really loved. Not that I didn't love like GP, but I knew that even though I was good at my job, and I knew that I really enjoyed working with patients, and based off of the feedback I got, that patients enjoyed coming to me, so it was fulfilling in that sense. I wasn't completely happy, and I couldn't imagine myself just doing clinical work. So that was me finishing GP training for being a GP for the next 30 years of my life. What I decided to do was, after I finished my GP training, I was going to apply for a master's in medical education and then take it from there. And that's where things started to change. But the moral of the story is that actually throughout that GP training, there were moments where I was burnt out. There were moments where I actually ended up taking time off work. And I think the moral of the story here is that there is always time to do academia. There is always time to get involved with these things. And even though you might see students in medical school doing academic stuff and then in their training and they've got tons of publications, if it's something you're actually interested in, there will be opportunities at some point. And just because it's not happening right now doesn't mean it will never happen. So the final chapter is where I give you some highlights to my steps to becoming an academic GP. So what is an academic doctor? Basically, an academic doctor is typically a clinician who works for a university or academic institution and is involved in teaching or research. So I've been working as an academic GP for the past 4 years. Oh, I need to show my badges. Actually, I'll do that later. So I've been working as an academic GP for 4 years. Once I had started doing my master's in med ed, I really started enjoying the theory around medical education. And then an opportunity came up where I could be a clinical lecturer and it would be a scholarship. So I went for it. And it was a tale of two halves. So it was my entry-level medical education role. It wasn't supported on the ground, so there wasn't really any managerial oversight, and there wasn't anyone really guiding the fellows, but it did give me the opportunity to meet some incredible people who absolutely changed my career. I think one of the things that's really important to appreciate that a lot of people don't recognize is that IMGs don't have social capital. They haven't been at the university for 5 to 6 years. They don't know who's an easy person to email. They don't have an understanding of the system. And so it was getting that entry-level medical education role that opened the doors to a networking world that changed the trajectory of my professional career. So it was a result of me doing my master's and working in this entry-level medical educational role that I recognized from doing the work that this is what I wanted to do as a portfolio GP. I wanted to teach. I absolutely loved facilitating sessions, loved working with students, but also what I caught was the research bug. And the reason why I'm invested in research is if you think about the amount of change that you can create as a doctor, you know, I see a patient, I make a difference in their life, and I will see how many patients in a day. If you teach, you know, I like to think that if I'm teaching a class of about 300 medical students, every patient that they become involved in will be someone who I reach. So my influence increases exponentially. But when you come to research, and research can change policy, can change guidelines, the amount of difference that you could make in people's lives could be unbelievable. So that was one of the reasons why I got involved in research, that actually I recognized that this was a way that I could really create change. And it was because of that, and because of that entry-level medical education role, that I became interested in pursuing academic fellowship. My husband at the time was training in the Central Belt, and I decided to move to be with him, thank goodness. We were doing long distance at the time, but it also gave me the opportunity to apply to be at a big academic center. And again, one of the best decisions I ever made, because of my academic fellowships at this big academic center, I managed to work with a bunch of people that I never would have been able to work with, and it ultimately led to me interviewing for a fully funded PhD and eventually being funded by the Wellcome Trust to do my PhD in medical education. Now, if I look back, and I was talking to Cara in 2014, 2015, and I told her, you know, Cara, you're gonna move to the United Kingdom, you're going to become a GP. I didn't know I wanted to be a GP. You are gonna get a master's in med ed, and at some point you're gonna meet your husband and you're going to be head of comm skills at a medical school, and then you're gonna step down from that and do a fully funded PhD. I wouldn't have believed you, because I knew I wanted to do that stuff, but it didn't feel like that was in the cards for me. So 10 years on from that first day working as an FY1, and here I am in 2025 talking to you on YouTube. Now, the idea behind me sharing this story was I wanted to let people know that where there's a will, there is a way. I didn't set out wanting this in my career, but because of the decisions I made along the way, I've ended up where I am now. So do you have any questions about making decisions or steps to becoming an academic doctor? If so, I would love to hear them. If you found this video helpful, then please subscribe, and yeah, let me know if there's anything else you would like to know about. I'm aware of the fact that I kind of skipped ahead the academic stuff, but that feels like a whole video in of itself. If you're in IMG and you're thinking about moving to the United Kingdom, good luck. It's not easy, but as somebody who's working here and has made a home here and is building an academic career here, can't say I've regretted it at all.